let's get back to some of these subjects. I was asked the question, firstly, with the... I said I'd tell you about that later, about the brain, soul and mind of soulmates, in terms of how they interact. If you could think of yourself... Well, I might use a different colour. So here's yourself and your soulmate. Remembering that each of you have a brain, hopefully. Somebody said. Never mind, you definitely got a brain. Yep. And you definitely got a spirit, body, mind too. No matter how much you use it, it's still there. And of course your soulmate also has a spirit body and a physical body. Now this is something to bear in mind, if we can say that. Can you see that the mind, if you stay in your mind exists in the spirit body's form, and your brain exists in the physical body's form? Can you see that if you stay in your brain, you will always be separate from your soulmate? And can you see if you stay in your mind, you will always be separate from your soulmate? It's impossible to actually merge if you stay in those places. But if you connect to your soul, so the female connects to her soul, her half of the soul, and the male connects to his half of the soul, now there's a combining thing that starts to occur, and that is you finish up having one mind, if you like, the mind of your soul. So the closer you get together, so the closer you join in truth, the closer the two halves of the soul become until they join. Once they join, and this is why it takes longer to become a soulmate in the soulmate union than it does to become at one with God. To become at one with God, one half of the soul becomes at one with God, in the sense that they now have received enough divine love to make the transition completely into their own soul, but the other half of the soul hasn't. And even if the other soul, half of the soul does do that, so in other words, they make their transition towards God as well, and they become at one with God, there is still the process where they need to become at one with each other and finish up having one mind, the mind of the soul. In other words, they need to join at the soul level in order to have one mind. Now imagine that happened for a moment. So it would be like having a soul mind. Now the soul mind exists in the entire of the soul, not in its two halves. Do you understand? It needs both halves of the soul in order to function. The soul's mind needs both halves of the soul in order to actually function. And so therefore both halves of the soul need to join in order for the soul's mind to fully function. And now that takes a lot longer than it does to become at one with God, because it requires the will of both halves to actually join. Now in that place, can you see another reason too why it's pointless staying in your mind? Like if you stay in your mind, the other half of the soul is never going to be fully joined with you, ever, if you stay in your mind. But if you release this as the controlling force over your life, and you release this as the controlling force over your life, this is now the controlling force over your life, the soul. Now your soul has the ability to merge with the other half of itself and still retain full functionality, right? But if you have this in place, there's going to be a temptation to always revert to your own mind. In other words, to revert to your own desire to control your own life, rather than allowing your unified soul to control both halves. In other words, your unified soul to control all four bodies. The two male and the two female bodies, the physical and spiritual bodies of both. Now, it's a fairly... I don't know if any of you are really following at the soul level what that would even be conceptually like, but I wanted to say that to you because while you hold on to your mind for dear life, or even worse, hold on to the facade that the mind creates for dear life, you have no chance to ever fully connect to your own soul, but also you preclude your own soulmate from ever connecting to your own soul, which is a very counterproductive action if you wish to develop spiritually. Does everyone get that? And often we are totally into counterproductive actions. You know, we do them all the time, unfortunately. But when you can see that the soul is the thing that is the only thing with the possibility of actually joining, and the mind of the bodies are really a secondary to that, once we've released the mind of the bodies and we're no longer focused on developing them ourselves, but we're focused on developing our soul, we then have a higher likelihood of firstly finding our soulmate, but secondly joining with them. Much higher likelihood of doing so. And the minds of both spirit bodies, in other words, all the memories that we have retained that are still in the mind, as they get absorbed into the soul more and more, we get to a point where all of the memories are in the soul, and when the soul joins, I remember all of Mary's memories, and Mary remembers all of my memories. And I feel the memory of all of her memories, and she would feel the memory of all of my memories. Does that make sense? On a feeling level, it's like you were there, feeling it as it was happening to you. That's what it feels like. And that's eventually what happens when you're in the soul union condition. That happens, where you have a complete merging of all memories and all experience into one unified whole.